Welcome. This is the candidate forum for City Council candidates running in the 5th Ward. It's hosted by the League of Women Voters of the San Bernardino area. I am Betsy Starbuck, co-president and your moderator for the debate. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan organization, encourages voting and the informed and active participation of all citizens in government. We influence government through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any candidate or political party. According to League guidelines, candidate forums cannot be taped or broadcast without permission of the League. No portion of the forum may be used in campaign materials. Further, the FCC requires that candidate forums, if authorized, be aired in their entirety. Any candidate who airs a snippet of this forum is doing so illegally. This forum is to present the candidates for the 5th Ward of the City of San Bernardino. In this race, the candidates are incumbent Henry Nickel and challenger Ben Reynoso. To begin, each candidate will have a 3-minute opening statement. The order of speaking has been drawn by lot. The first candidate answering a question will rotate. We drew names out of a hat, and Mr. Nickel will be the first with his opening statement. The closing statements will be presented in the same order as the opening statements. All candidate remarks will be timed to ensure equal opportunity for everyone. Our timekeeper this evening is League member Jorge Heredia. He will start the clock when the candidate begins speaking. Please stop promptly when your time is up. This debate is also available in Spanish, as you can see on the screen. Our interpreter is Mariela Trujillo. Both English and Spanish versions will be available for viewing anytime on the League's website. Viewing attendees may submit a question to the candidate by sending an email to the League of Women Voters email, which is leagueofwomenvoters.sb@gmail.com. Please write questions that both candidates can address, not specifically addressed to one candidate. Questions will be screened for appropriateness and grouped by topic. Duplicates or inappropriate questions will be eliminated. So we'll start now with Mr. Nickel. Please, your opening statement.
Thank you, and I wish to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum today, and fellow candidate Ben Reynoso. We had a very spirited primary election, and I really appreciate many of the ideas and comments that Mr. Reynoso presented. I think he's a very fine gentleman, and I look forward to a very spirited campaign and election season. I also wish to thank the audience. It's through active participation by people like you that make our democracy and local government work. So thank you for taking the time to watch this forum. My name is Henry Nickel. I was born, raised, educated in San Bernardino. I'm a homeowner here. I'm vested in this community. I purchased my home here in 2008. I'm employed in the city of San Bernardino. So I really count myself as a native resident. That being said, I have spent time abroad. I have worked elsewhere in the country, and I think I bring an array of experience to the job that lends to an ability to really understand some of the significant challenges we faced and some of the solutions that are available to us. In 2014, when I first ran for this office, our city was in bankruptcy. We had a very dysfunctional system of local government. We had no reserves, and we had no plan to revive our city. In the years since, we have recovered from bankruptcy, and we established a long-term 20-year plan of adjustment to get the city back on its feet financially and to provide the services that our residents pay for and deserve. We established a new charter against many odds. Many thought we couldn't do it, but we did it. We established a more functional form of government, and we still have a long way to go as a city. but we did also establish a $30 million reserve fund and caught up on audits that were long overdue and got the city back on its feet and eligible for much of the federal funding that for many years was denied our city because of our financial circumstances. And we are currently advancing a revived general plan to get our city back not only on its feet, but to become a true world-class 21st century city. And so in the years to come, I look forward to continuing my record of service and accomplishment, but also working together. And I think we as a community coming together can really achieve great things over the next 4 years. So I appreciate your vote. Look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reynoso, your opening statement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Reynoso. I want to take a moment here, just like Henry did, to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this. Henry, I appreciate you. Watched you from a distance for a while. Definitely learned a lot from watching. What I want to begin with saying is that during these unique times, I wish that I could have been out there at your doors. I wish that I could have been thanking all of the strong supporters. I wish that we could have doubled up on the efforts that we began in the primary, but we're not there. And so it's an extremely difficult time, but it's not unique to the city of San Bernardino. I entered this race as a community organizer, just as I began in the city of San Bernardino when I was 15. Lived in the 5th Ward as long as I've lived in San Bernardino. Like Henry, I went to the deep, I didn't go where he went, but I went to the Deep South. I studied at the University of Southern Mississippi, study currently at Loyola Marymount University, where I'm receiving my master's in education. Deeply concerned about the culture of San Bernardino, because honestly, a lot of the things that I saw as a high school student here still prevail here. A lot of lack of inclusion, or an extreme lack of inclusion that almost at times feels intentional. A culture that has left people in the dark, where when I'm knocking on doors, people are telling me they haven't had their door knocked on in 40 years and they've lived there this whole time. That's an issue to me. It's beyond just the engagement. But the reality of running for office is that you don't go into office in order to become the expert. You go in there to continually learn and engage people in an intentional way. The city hasn't been creative enough for me. So as an organizer, I felt like I learned as much as I could from the outside, and it was time to get inside. I need to see the documentation. I need to expose some of the things that are happening when it comes to development culture in particular. I need people to know how much finances or how much funding is going here, there, and the other. What kind of revenue we are getting out of these deals. To be honest with you, I feel like we've kind of, forgive me for having not good words to use for this, but I feel like the city's kind of been pimped. Like we're being kind of sold out, and our land, the idea is that our land is cheap and that's it. And so a lot of people in this city feel sadly like they're worth as much as the warehouse land that was sold right next to their neighborhoods. The land that is going to be sold to somebody from out of county. A lot of people have issues trusting that the truth is even coming from leadership anymore, because we've got newspapers that don't necessarily tell the whole side of this story. When the community gets their voice in the newspaper, maybe we hear 5, 6 opinion pieces countering in favor of developers. The culture of telling the truth is all that I offer to the city of San Bernardino. No more, no less. With me, those who know me know that I'm extremely passionate about this city. I came back after learning all the things that I learned from truly listening to people. And that's how I got here. We listen to people. It's not about listening to them and then telling them something different or representing them in a different way. It's about telling the truth. And so that's what you get with Ben Reynoso. And again, I appreciate this time, and I look forward to a spirited forum or debate or a good night with you, Henry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynoso. The first question will go to you. In your district, there are areas that are prone to fire and flooding. What will you do to protect those who are in such areas?
So one of the most important things that I learned in the South is how they have the evacuation routes that are explicitly labeled for hurricanes. That's not the same culture that it is here. We have fire hazards, as we've seen recently. I want to commend our firefighters for honestly doing some work that isn't really thanked enough. These guys go out here with hoses and they're fighting fires in the woods. They go out there for us with no hesitation. So the least that we can do as a city is smart plan. You have to have evacuation routes listed, especially in North Verdamont over here on the deep north end. People are more concerned because they have just the hill behind them. I grew up right at the foot of Little Mountain on the top of Muscoobiabe. we had stories, me and my best friends, of going down the street wearing bandanas and t-shirts over our faces, trying to get the older people out of our neighborhoods. My friend's grandma, trying to convince her to leave the home. And the reality was that there was no solidified kind of evacuation route. There were no centers that you could go to in the worst case scenario that we haven't seen in a long time, where your house were to burn down, resources that are on tap. We have to work with the fire department in order to educate the public in an intentional way. The way that I'm talking about exposing information, that looks like very intentional public forums, not once a year, not when the firefighters come to us. It's about asking the firefighters, hey, are you willing to have an open forum? Can we rotate around the city several times so that people have the opportunity? Can we do things like this? COVID has taught us that the digital age is something to be taken advantage of. Being able to list and chime in on public comment from the comfort of your home, that's something that people have needed for so long. So imagine if you could sit at the house and you knew that you finally had this time this week. I missed the 2 physical forums. Now I can hear about it online. The firefighters are telling me that, hey, this area is somewhere that we need a station in. Our city lost the fire department. The county owns it. That's nothing against the county or anything, but the reality was it was poor financial management that allowed for us to not only sell the fire department to the county, but to also lose a lot of the property taxes that came with that. That's the trade-off with that. We're giving them about $34 million a year in order to just maintain fire services. Why aren't we going a step further and trying to bring them back in the city? There's stations right here that are vacant. I was talking to Louis, who lives right here on Kendall Drive, straight across from where the one is, right by Cal State, and it's totally empty. And because of it being empty, it's not only that the fire department doesn't have direct access to the area immediately surrounding it, it's that the traffic on that street, believe it or not, is an unintentional way of mitigating traffic, but people are flying up and down that street, no speed traps or anything, because fire is not present right there. That's a part of the equation. That's natural kind of like community integration. And that's something that we lose, that we don't realize we've lost until years after. And so honestly, it's working with the fire department in a very, very intentional way, in a very public way. That's the way to get around this, honestly, to be safe at all times.
Thank you, Mr. Reynoso. The question to you again, Mr. Nickel, is in your district, there are areas that are prone to fire and flooding. What will you do to protect those who are in such areas?
Yeah, well, about 25 years ago, I was an intern for the city of Redlands. And at that time, our region endured some major flooding. And one of the jobs I had as an intern was to integrate our city's public works system and identify how we would deploy resources consistent with what we call FEMA standards, FEMA methodology. And basically what that methodology requires is an understanding of how to respond to an emergency, how to recover from an incident, and then how to mitigate future disasters. And I think that methodology is one that we have to use as policymakers. To Ben's point, I completely agree. On the response side of things, we need to make sure that even though we do no longer have a city fire department, we need to hold the county accountable to ensure that we have appropriate resources in response times. And that includes having an additional fire station in the north end that can respond in a timely fashion if and when we have major disasters such as fires and floods. On the recovery side, the city now is financially stable, and we need to make sure that we do everything to make sure we have good policies and a good system of local government in place so we can rapidly mobilize and recover funding for the resources that we have to deploy in the event of a major emergency. And that includes good management practices. And that is something that we are investing in currently, and ensuring that the taxpayers are reimbursed for those costs if and when we do have to respond, and that we're able to mobilize regionally. We had a fire here at Little Mountain where I live. I live just down the street from where Ben grew up. And we had a fire a couple years ago. And I will be honest, the county resources are very, very good. And they were able to mobilize resources that the city just wouldn't have had at that time. and we were able to ensure that no structures were damaged or lost. In addition, we need to make sure we mitigate, which means good development. And I agree with Ben that we need to make sure that as part of both our general plan and going forward as we review development projects, this past couple of years, we had what was called the Spring Trails Project. And one of the major concerns in that far north end of Vermont was the potential impact it would have in terms of disasters such as fires and floods. And together with my colleagues on the council, we decided to deny the request to annex that portion of land into the city that would have increased our obligation and increased the threat and risk of future fires and floods for the people, not only in that region, but for the city.
Okay, thank you very much. From here on out, all of the questions you'll only get 2 minutes to answer. So this next question is directed to Mr. Nickel first. Much of the city has antiquated infrastructure, specifically drainage and storm sewers. What is your plan for replacing it?
Yeah, well, out of the bankruptcy, one of the stunning findings was the amount of what we call deferred maintenance. This is maintenance that would have otherwise have occurred had the city had the financial resources to maintain the infrastructure that we're responsible for. The city, quite simply, is a built environment. It's streets, it's sewers, it's sidewalks, it's facilities, it's equipment that is used to provide for the needs of our community. And unfortunately, during the course of several decades, the investments simply weren't made in vital infrastructure. And one of the core findings of our bankruptcy was the need to begin addressing that deferred maintenance. There's over $200 million in deferred maintenance that was identified. We also conducted a comprehensive review of more than 150 city facilities, buildings, and found that many of them are in a state of maintenance that will require significant investment over the years ahead, if not divestment. In other words, either selling off those properties or disposing of those properties simply because there's so much maintenance required. What that requires is a council that really understands good fiscal management practices and prioritization and how we prioritize certain facilities and investments in a way that help to stimulate additional investment and revenue generation in the city so we can continue the process of upgrading our infrastructure. But certainly our infrastructure is in dire need of investment. And for the council over the next 4 years, our job with our new city manager is going to be identifying revenues and resources that we can deploy, both in terms of those monies we have available to us, grant funding, state and federal funding, other sources of funding that we can deploy in a way that will ensure that our residents have the high quality infrastructure they deserve.
Okay, Mr. Reynoso, same question to you. Much of the city has antiquated infrastructure, specifically drainage and storm sewers. What is your plan for replacing it?
So to be honest with you, we have to have the conversation about where the $10 million that came in a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago for infrastructure, where it went. We can do all the Band-Aid solutions that we want. So my short answer is to replace it, is to apply for grants. We need grant writers in the city that will advocate with the state assembly members. And I have to say that I do have the support of the state assembly members, Eloise Reyes, Senator Connie Leyva. So it's a pipeline that is trusted there already. I think a lot of the state assembly doesn't trust that we are going to be responsible enough to handle more than an amount like $10 million. And what do? We hooked up a couple streets over here behind my old high school. Cajon High is a perfect example. Well, look, before I get to Cajon High, let's talk about how much money we're spending with the local operating engineers, the city staff who are out here putting asphalt on these potholes in the same places that water is constantly running and washing the asphalt straight out. We're totally wasting money. We do it perpetually. We have this street over here that has had the most atrocious speed bumps since well before I was even at Cajon High School. And you've got people who have lost, think about how many lawsuits. First off, the people that can afford lawsuits versus the people who can't afford lawsuits just for car damage from speed bumps. You're talking about the same infrastructure. It's all attached. It's one body. So over here we have these lumps. And what does the city do when they finally fix it? Is they just kind of smooth it down and put a Band-Aid on it. Instead of acknowledging the reality, these are tree roots. We have to talk about vanity versus practicality. We have to be practical about this stuff. We're doing so many, all we have is like a box of Band-Aids in San Bernardino. No one is literally trying to get to the root. And this question, the root, is the sewage and storm drainage system. When it rains like here, we're not built for it. We have so many pockets of the city where the street and the intersection just floods. And then what do? When it empties out? We have more potholes and we send the guys, just like I said, to fill it back up. And then it rains again. Or then somebody rolls over an 18-wheeler, knocks it out. That's where we need to go, is smart planning, real advocacy with our state members, and doing the right thing about it first.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question, it begins with you, Mr. Reynoso. Good governance and stability in a city are necessary for economic growth. The mayor and the city council have a code of conduct. What would you do if the mayor or a fellow council member was not in compliance?
So the reality is, code of conduct should be unspoken. You need rules like that because you've seen the circus that has become the city council. You've got members on the board who literally don't know how to not stop talking. When it's your turn to talk, you talk. But I'm not going to go up there and be a dictator. What would I look like chiming in with a bunch of people who are just trying to bark over each other? I'm going to look like a clown at the circus right there with them. I know how to work with people, but the reality is it looks how it does because business isn't being handled in the closed session right before the public council meetings. Or maybe you're just lying to each other and you think that you have an understanding of how the city council meeting is going to operate that night, how this item is going to be discussed, how you feel about it, or an understanding of it at least. But it shows in the council meeting that we all witnessed, that everybody in the region could watch online. It's a circus. So to be honest with you, I don't have a simple answer to that. I'm not going to be a dictator. I'm not going to be the person who's held solely responsible for taming all of the old guys on the council who want to argue with each other just because they're mad, just because they feel like I can't get my political point across, or I feel so passionate about this issue that you're going to hear me regardless. It doesn't matter what the rules are. There are code of conduct because people run for leadership. People want to represent people, hopefully because they really want to do it in a true way. You going up there, saying it and acting the way that people have been acting, has to be like the most, I take it as intentional disrespect. I can't say, I'm not going to extend that to Henry. Henry's pretty calm. But the rest of the members, and this is important because potentially I could fill this seat, the rest of the members on the board and the council have to know that you represent people and you are the face of this city. Stop disrespecting each other. So when it comes to code of conduct, I'm not the dictator again. I'm not going to be the person who takes out a magical whip that turns all these older people into these magic, quiet, good participating students.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Nickel, same question to you. Good governance and stability in a city are necessary for economic growth. The mayor and city council have a code of conduct. What would you do if the mayor or a fellow council member was not in compliance?
Yeah, and as I had mentioned in my opening remarks, in 2016, the voters approved a new city charter, and that charter mandates a code of conduct. And therefore, it is incumbent upon council members to not only adhere to that code of conduct, but to also mutually enforce that code of conduct. And you know, I agree with Ben. We've seen certainly in several recent meetings a deterioration of decorum, and it's important as council members that we conduct ourselves civilly, that we exercise good judgment and temperament. This is a tough job, and we have a very diverse and passionate community, but that does not mean that we engage in uncivil behavior on that dais. And I think it's incumbent on each council member, as well as our community. You as constituents, you are the government. The government is you. The elected officials are simply your representatives. You're the boss. I have 35,000 bosses. And I think it's important that we as constituents communicate to our respective city council members our dissatisfaction when they conduct themselves in a way that is not reflective of what we as a city need to reflect to the broader community to attract the investment we need, to attract the good residents that we need, to build the type of community that we all want. And our behavior matters. And it's important that we also enforce those rules. And if necessary, impose fines and censure and other penalties upon our fellow council members, subject to a majority vote of the council if and when those codes of conduct are violated.
Thank you. The next question goes to you, Mr. Nickel. Do you support or oppose Prop 15? You're not unmuted. There you go.
Could you explain to the voters what Prop 15 is?
Yes, it's a voter initiative to modify property tax for commercial and industrial properties.
Yeah, and I think they call it the split roll, right?
People have called it split roll, which
Right.
is similar to all other 49 states, or it's also known as schools and community first.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line here is when Prop 13 was passed in the late 70s, the primary reason for it was the fact that property values were increasing at such a rate that many homeowners, especially those that were older homeowners, retired on fixed incomes, were losing their properties because of higher income or higher property tax. And what Prop 13 did is they capped that. It established a system of capping those tax increases. But also those protections were also translated over to commercial properties and other properties. The debate is, of course, if they are allowed to create what's called a split roll, where you can create or increase taxes on commercial properties without the same protections that you provide on residential properties, that those taxes could escalate. And I think we as a city, I'll be honest, I've seen both sides of this argument. There are concerns that it could push businesses out because their commercial leases would go up. And certainly in a city like ours during the time of COVID, any increase in costs for a business have a potential detrimental impact. But I think overall, I think certainly giving some differentiation to how we treat commercial and residential properties is important. So I've looked at Prop 15. I think it's something that I'll be honest, I'm still doing my research on it. But I think certainly having a differentiation between residential and commercial properties is important. And I may actually be supporting Prop 15 in this election, but I need a little bit more time to research it and consider the impact that split roll would have, particularly on our smaller businesses here in this community that are struggling greatly and would be greatly impacted if their leases increased.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Reynoso. Do you support or oppose Prop 15?
So I won't take the full 2 minutes. Yes, because just like Henry said, property taxes were skyrocketing, but that was 78. 1978 it was capped. 78, 40 years ago, and it extended to commercial properties. Some of the commercial properties that he may be referring to in this area are not commercial properties that are paying their fair share. I'm about the fair share. I'm not enthusiastic about taxes. No one is. I'm not enthusiastic about imposing unnecessary taxes on the taxpayer. But I would be doing a disservice to my heart, to the work that community organizers that I even work with on the ground have been doing day in and day out, calling everybody and their mother, their sister, their cousin, in order to tell the truth about what Prop 15 could bear when it comes to finances and resources for schools. That's what they call schools and communities first. The resources that hospitals even need. The privatization has existed and has flourished because we haven't had enough funding. Because the extreme example is like a Disneyland, who's paying cents per square inch of land that they own. So imagine what Disney should be paying in 2020 versus what they're paying from 1978. That's a bigger example, but to answer it short and sweet, I'm a strong yes on Proposition 15.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Reynoso, the next question starts with you as well. There's a lot of concern about the city's entry corridors, such as Baseline, Highland Avenue, and 40th Street. What do you do, or what can you do to improve these major thoroughfares?
So this goes straight to smart development. When you're talking about the logistics hub that we've become, everybody, it's no secret that San Bernardino is the shopping cart for America. We provide e-commerce right here. Our workforce is in these warehouses. But what that really translates to is 18-wheelers riding through the corridors that you're talking about, creating the most atrocious roads that we have. And what do? Sometimes we fill it up with asphalt. Sometimes we talk about it. We don't talk about it. The reality is, if we really had an intentional conversation about this, if it went beyond this question, we'd be challenging developers in a way that is very uncomfortable to a lot of leadership, maybe, because we're talking about campaign contributions. We're talking about how people own this city. Developers own this city. That is no secret. We've got developers here who have built 26 warehouses, which not all of them are even occupied with tenants, pimping the land so that we see, and that's what we really see. Maybe we're not fully aware what the conditions are inside of these warehouses, but we know what those corridors look like. I went to Arrowview Middle School. I walked Highland Ave every day. I walked down Muscogee, I went down Highland Ave. I saw it get worse and worse. I'm seeing areas in this city that should not have 18-wheelers going down the street, go down their street. It's completely irresponsible development. So what that looks like is restricted truck routes. I propose that we have restricted truck routes, that we be intentional about where 18-wheelers are allowed to move through. The warehouses aren't going to disappear. That's a reality. They're here. But you can tell 18-wheelers, not against the truckers, you got to tell the companies that you can't have this coming right through here. But that looks like challenging developers. And I'm willing to do that. So the short and sweet, and maybe it's not an answer that anybody expected, is that Ben Reynoso is here to challenge every and any developer that seeks to manipulate the city of San Bernardino and not pay in order to make it better for us. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Same question to you, Mr. Nickel. There's a lot of concern about the city's entry corridors, such as Baseline, Highland Avenue, and 40th Street. What will you do to improve these major thoroughfares?
Yeah, well, the city has, we're a large city, so we have quite a few gateways. And certainly, anybody who's lived in this city for any length of time, at one time, our gateways were very well kept and very attractive. In the last few years, we've acquired over through our partnership with our state representatives, State Representative James Ramos, was able to bring $3 million to our city to update our general plan. And part of that general plan update will include an additional more than $500,000 dedicated to what we call a specific plan for the downtown area. That includes the former Carousel Mall and other areas of downtown. And the intent is to create a 21st century urban core, a true downtown environment that will be unique in the Inland Empire and really put San Bernardino back on the map as a desirable, attractive place for people to move to and to raise their families and to purchase homes and to make their community. We are looking at those major corridors of the city. We've already moved forward on the 5th Street corridor, and we are working with developers to move forward on the mall project and make sure that it's designed in such a way that's consistent with the aesthetic and history of our city. But certainly the 40th Street corridors, the Highland Baseline corridors, all of these corridors are on our list over the next several years to look at, both in the context of our general plan, to gain community input, and then make investments, strategic investments in beautifying those corridors and putting in improvements on those corridors that really make them attractive. Additionally, Route 66 is being invested in by Caltrans. So we have a number of corridors that are currently under development.
Okay, thank you. You'll start with the next question, Mr. Nickel. The point in time 2020 count reveals that the city of San Bernardino leads the area with the most homeless individuals in our county. What is your plan to address the issue, and what resources will you consider utilizing to decrease the homeless population?
Well, homelessness is a challenge that's facing cities throughout our state and throughout our country right now. But certainly what we've found in my day job, I'm actually a data analyst for the county, so I work with a lot of county statistics and data. And what we've seen over recent years is the demand for homeless services countywide. Almost 40% of the calls for homeless services throughout the county come from one city, San Bernardino. We have an over-concentration of homeless in our city currently. And it's been a challenge that a number of us on the council have been working to address. And it needs to be done on a regional basis through the county, and specifically through the coordination of mental health services, public health services, substance abuse treatment programs, housing, any number of coordinated services that we need to provide to ensure that individuals get back to a productive life and have some dignity. But we do find that we do have what we call chronically homeless individuals that are resistant to services. And in order to address that, the city needs to provide locations where they can be housed and to enforce ordinances that ensure that property owners are protected from loitering and camping and littering and destruction of property. And we are working looking at different programs that we can utilize over the years ahead and develop those investments and facilities that we need to effectively address the homeless situation. But it's a combination of enforcement and services to ensure that individuals, again, are able to get back on their feet and get the services they need to bring stability to their lives.
Thank you. The same question to you, Mr. Reynoso. The 2020 point in time count reveals that the city of San Bernardino leads with the most homeless individuals in our county. Excuse me. What is your plan to address this issue, and what resources will you consider utilizing to decrease the homeless population?
So we can come up with all the Band-Aid solutions we want. Affordable housing isn't totally Band-Aid. We do have 1,000 units that are coming to the city of San Bernardino, but if those don't come with supplemental services, then we're not doing anything. We're just putting another Band-Aid on it. Reality is what Henry's talking about, the chronic homelessness, those are foster youth. I've worked with those foster youth in South Central. I grew up with tons of foster youth. I understand why they don't believe that anybody cares about them. That's how you become chronically homeless. Mental illnesses are developed post-homelessness. Maybe you have PTSD from your own home life, but when no one else cares for you beyond the classroom, or you go to a classroom that has 40 students in it, that's what we need to get to, is preventative work. We have to invest in mental health resources. We have to advocate as city council. We got to break that wall with the Board of Education. We have to get to our teachers. They know the issues. We have to talk to students. I had all these problems during COVID, trying to get the truth across, even to radio personalities. People saying like, oh yeah, we're interviewing this person high up here, this person high up here. And I kept asking, are you asking any students how it is to deal with this right now? And it was a no. And it was uncomfortable because the reality was, I think in acknowledging the question, you had to acknowledge that, oh, I don't really care that much about the youth. I don't really care about being preventative about homelessness. I just want to put a Band-Aid. The reality is all of our neighbors, we can be totally honest about it. The people who really complain about homelessness, they just don't want to see homeless people around. And so we do need to provide some kind of shelter for the people who are not going to accept the services. But the real answer is always going to be in preventative work. We have to work with our school districts. K through 12, I know so many people personally from this city who have given up on themselves, and for reasons that I don't even care to argue against. I'm all for optimism. But if you have a city that totally feels like it's turned its back on you over and over and over again, if you feel like the only support you get is in the classroom from that one teacher, what do you expect? It's going to be more homelessness. That's where we are, preventative work.
Thank you. Mr. Reynoso, the next question goes to you to begin with. Do you support or oppose Measure S?
I oppose Measure S because it's perpetual. The way it's written, and I got to be honest with you, for all the council members, just isn't against you, Henry. I don't appreciate getting with the water bill the little Measure S thing and feeling like that's the only time I'm being engaged. Like, oh, cool, we messed up. The reality is the city messed up. It was a Measure Z conversation that was supposed to, Measure Z would sunset in 2021, the quarter-cent tax, 7.75 at the city level, bumped it up to 8 since about 2006. They missed the deadline to put it on the ballot. So what do? A gut decision, an impulsive decision. Let's create a tax and not a quarter cent. Let's add a whole cent tax, would bring us up to 8.75 after Z expires if it were to pass. That is indefinite. That says clear as day. The only thing that is written explicitly is poor policy. That is written explicitly is that the voters would have to bring it back on the ballot. Come on, I'm from San Bernardino. Most of these people on this call are from San Bernardino. You know that's not how it works. You know how hard it is to get something like that back on the ballot. It's dumb. I think no on Measure S because I don't trust it and I don't like any kind of burden on the taxpayer, especially one that's perpetual. It's indefinite. You would literally just have the tax imposed on you without any kind of context of where it's going. And then you're just supposed to trust that one day we can all just hold arms together and put it back on the ballot. This is voter suppression city. This is the capital of lack of inclusion. I'm running because I seek to change that stuff, but it's about the people coming after me who will do that. And it's not enough time, to be honest with you, in order to combat something like a perpetual tax, an infinite tax with Measure S. So I'm no, because I'm all about accountability, and that is the epitome of no accountability.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Nickel, question to you. Do you support or oppose Measure S?
I support Measure S. And as I had stated in my opening comments, the city went through a bankruptcy, one of the largest bankruptcies in U.S. history, municipal bankruptcies. And out of that bankruptcy, we were obligated to create a 20-year plan of adjustment. We're obligated, the city obligated itself under that plan to stabilize our finances. And the city did pass many years ago what was called Measure Z. As Mr. Reynoso mentioned, it was a quarter cent. So 1/4 cent of every dollar spent on taxable goods in the city went to the city for specific uses, or was intended for specific uses. Now that tax is sunsetting in 2022. It will go away. And that tax has brought in approximately about $8 million or so, plus or minus every year. What the council looked at, and we began studying, is what other sales tax levels exist in cities throughout California. Currently, the city of San Bernardino is at 8% total sales tax. By adding that 0.75%, so as Measure Z sunsets and goes away, Measure S will come in with a full 1 cent sales tax, which is only a 0.75% increase over the 0.25% sales tax we currently have. That will provide over $40 million in general fund revenue that will get the city financially solvent, consistent with our bankruptcy plan of adjustment. And that will ensure that the city does not go back into bankruptcy and can provide the services that residents need, including public safety, including the homeless services that are required, senior programs, other services that the city unfortunately does not have the funding to provide. So I support Measure S, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Next question to you, Mr. Nickel. What is your plan for economic development of downtown San Bernardino?
Well, it's already started. And I think, as I mentioned before, we got a lifeline from the state through our Assembly member, James Ramos. For years, while I was on the council, one of my biggest concerns was how we generate revenue. We're always talking about how much we spend, but when you actually look at per capita spending in our city, it's fairly anemic compared to most of our surrounding neighboring cities. And the real problem we have isn't a spending problem, it's a revenue problem. And a lot of that gets to the point of having to generate good quality development, sustainable development in our city that generates the tax revenue needed to provide the services that residents need. So we've already started, because of the $3 million provided through the state with Assemblymember Ramos's assistance. The city will now have the ability to update its general plan, which we've been needing for many years. And ever since I first came on the council, one of the common refrains from our staff and developers was you need to update your general plan. And that's what we are working on. In fact, in just recent weeks, we approved the first steps in getting that plan underway and expending that $3 million for the benefit of our residents and ensuring that we have good quality development. In addition, we've moved forward with the 5th Street Corridor project, which is to revitalize 5th Street, which is where the In-N-Out Burger is located, up to about D Street, and then the downtown mall. And we're also looking at our Civic Center. As I mentioned before, we've done a facility study, and we're going to need to revitalize our Civic Center right adjacent to the mall property as well. So there's great opportunities ahead, and I think with the general plan that we've been needing for years and finally have the funding to move forward on, the city's future looks very, very good right now, very bright.
Thank you, Mr. Nickel. The same question to you, Mr. Reynoso. What is your plan for economic development of downtown San Bernardino?
To include downtown San Bernardino first and foremost in the conversation. Henry mentioned a second ago that the Carousel Mall is priority. And I would really like to ask in a very public way. I wish that I had the means to communicate with everybody right now. How many people even know that it's being redeveloped, that there are bids to redevelop it? Nobody. General plans are statements that are basically economic plan of development moving forward. So it's $3 million, cool. But it's a plan. It's just a plan. The reality is that looks like, to me, someone who's been here, a developer gets to run it. A developer gets to move it however. We advertise it to them. We got $3 million to advertise. Hey, come pimp us. And I'm over that. The reality of downtown San Bernardino is that people have their heart invested in the Carousel Mall. That people want to see the epicenter of a city, a downtown, thrive in the way that it's supposed to. But why aren't we asking people? Because I think a lot of people, and this is important, it's extremely important. I was having a conversation about a warehouse that popped up. Sure, maybe this won't be a warehouse, but it will be more traffic. So you see a warehouse come up, and maybe at the end of your day, you're just over it. It's already tilted up. That's it. That's not the reality. Most of the development that happens in the city, not most, but a lot of it, it ends up being vacant. And so if community knew it was vacant, they would be more aware of how the deal was negotiated from the jump, is that we sell the land, the developer becomes the owner of the land, developer gets to do whatever they want with it, profit however they want with it. We take a hard flat rate in tax. We don't take a percentage. And that's why you have the Amazons pimping us out. I actually heard something from Henry on his site from like 2013 saying that it didn't work out the way that we planned with Amazon. It didn't really work out that way. It didn't fill the coffers how it was supposed to. And yet they're about to open up their first West Coast airstrip at the San Bernardino International Airport. After all the community pushback in the world that we could, still the developer reigns supreme. And so the reality is, got to engage people in the downtown area. Otherwise, they're just going to get pushed out by mixed housing, whatever else we think is best for them without them.
Thank you. Next question directed to you, Mr. Reynoso. What are your suggestions to address the loss of revenue due to COVID?
I'm going to be honest with you. This hit us like a brick. No one's prepared for COVID, but I think it's ignorant to think that the state isn't going to have federal funding that comes down the pipeline that we can apply for. We need grant writers. This money will make itself back. We have to be creative about how that money gets trickled down. We can't have small businesses that are just being outsourced. I saw my gym, it's not a small business really, but I saw it get renamed, and I'm starting to see them get renamed everywhere. Esporta Fitness. And so if you've got that kind of culture already happening, we've had all of this funding from CARES Act funding. We had about $6 million. $6 million. The reality first and foremost is that people need that for their rent, for their mortgage. We're a city that rents. We should have more home ownership, but people need that money directly going straight to their mortgages, to their rental payments. That's going to keep us here. Are we trying to lose people, or are we trying to make them have an avenue in order to stay? So we have to advocate in any and every way that we can for funding. It's not Measure S. When we had Measure Z, $8 million that we made a year, it went straight to the police department, and we didn't really see anything besides intervention work. It wasn't preventative work. Nothing was being ahead of it. And so we are post-COVID, or we're not post-COVID yet, we're still in the pandemic. When this is over, the money is going to come down. Whether they tell you what we can do or not, or if the narrative looks like Measure S is our only savior, you got to dig a little deeper, do some more research, but honestly trust that if I get in, when I get in, it's going to look different. It's going to look like an open, established relationship with our state assembly members that you know about, that you know how much money is available, that you know we're missing out on. We talked about the homelessness. We had millions of dollars in HEAP funding. That's a homelessness like emergency fund to create things like housing that we don't even apply for. I asked the state assembly member, why didn't we apply for it? So I don't know. Ask the council, why didn't we apply for it? I don't know. So getting beyond I don't know and doing it, acting.
Thank you for your comments. Question to you, Mr. Nickel. What are your suggestions to address the loss of revenue due to COVID?
Well, and I think that dovetails with some of the prior questions that were asked. We're actually sitting in a very reasonably advantageous position as a city because of the fact that we're on the cusp of major revitalization in our city. And specifically what we have to do post-COVID is invest in those post-pandemic resources, services, and development activities that will ensure we get the investment that's required. We actually did get a significant amount of CARES Act funding into our city. Well over $40 million came into the city. And as I mentioned, I'm a data analyst with the county, so we watch these numbers very closely. But one of the advantages, uniquely enough, that has somewhat insulated the city itself from COVID is the fact that many of the jobs in our city are government sector jobs. Thousands of decent paying government jobs are located in our downtown area. So we haven't seen the levels of high unemployment, at least locally. The problem is, of course, that many of those jobs are held by non-residents. So they earn their money here and then they take it elsewhere. And so what we increasingly have to do moving forward, both through our general plan over the next 4 years, developing the downtown mall, developing the various corridors in our city, is develop those sales tax generating centers, including retail operations, more restaurants, high quality retail and restaurant operations in our downtown by working closely with the development community in a way that attracts the type of development we need to generate the revenue we need so that we can bounce back effectively. The other thing we've been doing, and I've been encouraging businesses throughout the Fifth Ward, is to take advantage of the county's COVID compliance program. There's a number of different programs available to business owners, and we've been promoting those programs and subsidies to make sure they get through COVID as effectively as possible.
Thank you for your comments. The next question is directed to you. To begin with, Mr. Nickel, do you support or oppose Measure U? Measure U is a voter initiative to repeal Fire Protection District Number 5.
Yeah, and I'm opposing Measure U simply because, again, out of the bankruptcy, the city found that fire services in particular were a major cost component to our budget. And of course, there were differences of opinion in terms of how we address that, but ultimately, the council collectively decided to annex into the county's fire district. And part of the funding, vital funding required, as I mentioned, we need to ensure that we have additional fire station in the Fifth Ward. A major component of the funding that will provide for that type of facility and those services is the money that would otherwise be lost if Measure U is successful. And we need those services. Now, my support of Measure U is contingent upon, or opposition to Measure U is contingent upon ensuring that the county fulfills its obligation specifically to the Fifth Ward residents to ensure we have adequate response emergency services, including an additional fire station, fire equipment, fire personnel, to deal with the immediate need to respond to fires and floods that pose a major risk to the Fifth Ward. So my opposition to Measure U is based on the county's commitment to ensure that we have not only keep the current service levels, but invest in those service levels that are needed to keep our community safe and ensure we have adequate response when a major emergency arises.
Thank you very much. Same question to you, Mr. Reynoso. Do you support or oppose Measure U?
I oppose Measure U, unnecessary taxes, to be honest with you. And there's little earmarks in there that are challenging kind of the way that people will be able to serve, like the Board of Supervisors. And it's teetering on the idea that the county will operate and tell the cities what's best without consulting the cities. And so I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with unnecessary tax that comes from gasoline and other means that aren't gonna really be responsibly spent here in the city. And so the short and sweet, go ahead.
Let me clarify, Mr. Reynoso. The Measure U is a repeal of Fire Protection District 5.
Oh, I'm thinking of the wrong measure.
Yeah, if you oppose the repeal, you would be for the tax. If you support the repeal, then you're opposed to then you want the tax.
No, to be honest with you, I trust the firefighters, and I trust them well enough, and I trust my partners in labor that are very passionate about this. And so
is that
I'll be honest with
support
you.
or oppose?
I'm opposed. I'm a no on you, but I'll be honest with you. I'm not the expert, and just like all the other propositions that are on the ballot, I'm be the first person to say I'm going to do more research on it, because as an organizer, you have to be able to translate this information, not as the expert, but as somebody who's coming from the ground up, understanding it. And so just like all the rest of you, and how many people in this call do you really think know about Measure U? That's something that we have to be intentional about educating ourselves on. So I'm going to go do more research, but as of right now, I'm a no on you, because the people who are telling me all of the things that should not be supported by a vote of yes on you, I trust these people more than, honestly, I trust a lot of people who've been in leadership for a long time. These are people who work with community members, with labor.
Yeah.
And I just no on you.
Thank you for letting me clarify that. This is one of those measures that is confusing for voters.
Absolutely.
The next question goes to you to begin with, Mr. Reynoso. What will you do to enforce and strengthen city regulations to make businesses, tenants, and homeowners keep their properties clean?
I'll be honest with you, the code enforcement arm, that's been a conversation that's been going on for a long time. We haven't had a strong code enforcement for a long time, but I also hear from the Fifth Ward right here all the time. I'm knocking at some of these doors, people saying, why am I being fined for a piece of the mountain that isn't a part of my property? I've maintained it as well as I can, but at the same time, I know that I'm not responsible for it, so I get a ticket for it. I don't support the way that code enforcement has been operating, but they're under strain, to be honest with you. They're totally overburdened for the staff that they do have. The police department doesn't necessarily handle them anymore, and I don't think that they really should. But if you have code enforcement going out there telling people you can't park on your lawn, you can't have this many people here, it's an infringement. Honestly, I believe in sovereignty. I believe that people have the right to do most things as long as you're not infringing on your neighbor's rights, that you're not hurting anybody else. Your property is your property. People who have grown up with me dream of owning a home. And the day that comes, you want somebody to come and tell me that, hey, I got too many cars, or like I've got a family member who needs to park right here. Code enforcement is going to come give me a ticket. I'm trying to keep the city beautiful, but I don't have the means to do it anymore. We're in a drought. I don't want to water that anymore. I get a ticket. And so the question, I feel like, is biased in nature, but I'm going to be very frank, just like I've been in this whole answer so far, and say that I think there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had about what code enforcement is really being tasked to do. And if we're being predatory and trying to get any and all taxes that we can just for the sake of getting it.
Okay, thank you very much. Same question to you, Mr. Nickel. What will you do to enforce and strengthen city regulations to make businesses, tenants, and homeowners keep their properties clean?
Well, we actually have significant codes on the books. The question's enforcement. It's not that we need more regulations per se, but we need to enforce the regulations we have. And to Ben's point, we simply do not have the level of code enforcement required to accomplish that currently. And that's one of the reasons I also support Measure S, is because Measure S will provide the funding to get the resources that we need to ensure that we can adequately enforce our codes. Now, years ago, there was a theory that's become very common in criminology, which is called the broken windows theory, which basically is that the more a community begins to deteriorate, specifically the number of broken windows that exist within a community, the more you start to see an uptick in other types of activities that lead to further blight and criminal behavior. And certainly there are areas of the city that are in desperate need of improvement. The other thing we have in the city is we have many landlords, owners of property that don't reside in the city, and they've been given a pass for years. And I agree with Ben, we shouldn't have a system that just focuses on residents and homeowners. I really think we need to look at those vacant, blighted properties that we have that are particularly commercial properties or large multifamily properties that are owned by landlords that don't live here, and for many years have gotten away with substandard maintenance of their properties to the detriment of our residents in our community. And we need to ensure there's proper enforcement. So that's why I support Measure S, and I do support investments in code enforcement over the next 4 years to ensure that we address the vacant and blighted properties that exist here to improve the overall quality of life for our community.
Thank you. The next question begins with you, Mr. Nickel. What is your opinion of the 3 new residential developments in your ward under consideration? Are they good enough as proposed, in your opinion?
Which 3 are you talking about?
This is a question from the audience.
Okay, I'm not sure which 3. We have a number of development projects that have been entitled over the years. And one of the challenges I'm confronting right now is the fact that many years ago, during the height of the housing boom, the city approved tentative tract maps and entitlements. And many of those have just sort of sat there for years. And now that the economy has turned, interest rates are low, and we suddenly see this boom in housing construction and demand, we're starting to see these old projects get resurrected. And in some cases, we're finding out that there's some warts and ugliness to some of these projects that might have been approved years ago that aren't really consistent with the needs and desires of our community now. And so we'll actually be meeting with residents tomorrow morning, Saturday morning at Algoin Park, to look at one of those developments and look at and have our city staff available to answer questions. In this case, it's a project at the end of Palm that was approved well over a decade ago and is now moving forward, but there are aspects of that development that are very, very adversely affecting the neighborhood and will continue to do so. And we as a community need to come together to make sure that we hold the developers accountable and hold our city staff accountable, and quite frankly, hold me accountable to make sure that we as elected officials represent the interests of our residents and constituents to ensure that they aren't adversely impacted as these developments move forward. But that said, I think certainly the 5th Ward is an area that has tremendous opportunity so long as we develop the right way. And again, that gets back to our general plan update, making sure we have a general plan, to Mr. Reynoso's point, that includes good community engagement and input to make sure that that plan reflects the needs and desires of our community.
Thank you for your comments. Same question to you, Mr. Reynoso. What is your opinion of the 3 new residential developments in the 5th Ward under consideration? Are they good enough in your proposed opinion?
I wish that whoever asked the question, just like Henry, had mentioned them. But one that I do know about that he's speaking of is the Oxbow project, and I've done a little digging into it. And it kind of goes back on, you're going to hear me talk about developers a lot, but the reality is that Amazon facility, they don't want to call it an Amazon facility, the distribution center is an Amazon in Redlands off Lugonia. When it burned down in the summer, basically that developer was allowed to move that cement over here to the north end in Vermont. And so they got a certain amount of truck trips, and that's when people caught wind of it, because you see these massive trucks moving concrete. And in order to make that into cement, you have to grind it up. And where it is right behind people's homes in North Vermont. And that's totally irresponsible. Cal OSHA has documented records of this being a health hazard to an extreme extent. What the air will look like when that's ground up. The debris that burned have not been cured or cleaned in any kind of way. They were just simply transported to the north end. And so I do support development as long as it's responsible. With this project, I can't say that I support it. The other two I wish that you had listed. But with this project in particular, I can't say that I support it. I don't like hearing that the councilman was blindsided, that he didn't even know about it himself, because a lot of this stuff, to be fair, was way back in the books. And now we have a little money and it comes back. But this is totally irresponsible, but it's proof. The proof is in the pudding that developers run the show, because you got a developer over there who's allowed, because they own that land, to run it up to the north end over and over, 1,400 truck trips. The truck trips alone, what we're talking about with the corridors, you're turning Kendall Drive into a corridor. You're turning Palm into a corridor. These are heavy trucks. But beyond that, I'm extremely passionate about health. You're talking about grinding that up where kids are playing. You're talking about where elderly people have been living for decades. And you're just going to melt up the cement that hasn't been cleaned or cured at all. So no, it's not really an issue of support or not support. It's a issue of, do you care about the health of your constituents? And the answer is yes. When it comes to the development, that's secondary to that to me, always.
Okay. The last question for this evening is beginning with you, Mr. Reynoso. What is the best way to deal with crime?
The best way to deal with crime is to engage the community, first and foremost, not specifically through the police department. The police department's been overburdened. Police department gets calls that are meant for social workers, that are meant for all types of different venues and people who are professionals in various fields. But we expect the police to be able to answer these calls every time. And so we do need more interaction with police and community members directly, but we also need to be looking for alternative routes, programs that have worked. I was recently looking into Cahoots today. It's a program up north in the Pacific Northwest, and it's not perfect, but they've responded to over 250,000 calls over the past 10 years. And they've only had about 10, not even 10%, it's 250 that have needed police support. And so they got there because they did intentional outreach to the community. Hey, what's your issue? Homelessness? Why would you send a police officer first to handle a homeless person? Why wouldn't you be asking the question, hey, like just from a distance even? I know it's not always the safest, and I'm not expecting any social workers to be out there acting like police officers. But there are other ways that we can get to these people. These people aren't violent. Some of these people have mental illnesses. Sure, it could turn into a bad situation, but if you don't have somebody who's trained appropriately in the ways to handle those kind of crisis intervention, then you're expecting a special result for something that people aren't equipped to do. And that's not fault on the police. That's fault on government, to be honest with you, for not being creative or open to community engagement and community leadership when it comes to how to engage some of the prominent issues when it comes to public safety, especially here in the Fifth Ward. In a city like this that is crime riddled, you have to be creative about preventative work, and you have to be creative about how you handle situations so they don't become worse. So the culture and the divisions between police and community don't become worse. Intervention isn't going to be the answer. Sometimes it makes it worse, and that's a hard thing to hear, but we have to be preventative about it. But we've got to be very intentional about community outreach and engaging them on a personal level. I know that I don't have the resources the chief told me to speak and walk in the community, but maybe one day soon.
Thank you. And the same question to you, Mr. Nickel. What is the best way to deal with crime?
There we are. Well, as I had mentioned before, you know, crime has its genesis in, you know, the conditions that exist in a community in many ways. So policing isn't the only means by which we address criminality in a community. Certainly, as I mentioned, we have shown over the years what we call this broken windows theory, that as you improve the conditions in a community, it tends to change the behavior and the way people think of their community, and tends to reduce criminal activity and behavior. So there, in addition to needing police, which we certainly need additional law enforcement in our city currently, we also need to make strategic investments in improvements to our community to begin to bring down that level of crime that exists by bringing up the standards that exist in our communities and the quality of life that exists here. That said, I think the council really took some courageous action in the last couple of years. We've integrated what we call community-oriented policing services into our overall system of law enforcement in the city. And specifically, we've created 5 districts in the city, which allow the lieutenants that oversee those districts to really understand intimately our community and the areas that they're responsible for. Years ago, I was able to go to Omaha, Nebraska, and see their program that they call Omaha 360, which really looks at how you engage a community collectively and integrating your faith-based community, integrating your businesses, integrating your various neighborhood groups and other community groups, and engaging them in a way that really helps police really understand how best to address the challenges we have and how to mobilize other services in the city, as Ben had mentioned, mental health services and other services to really address those core needs that exist that contribute to crime.
Okay, thank you both very much. We've come now to where each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. Candidates, you may want to address any issues that have come up tonight or that have not come up. We will go in the same order as the opening statements because to reverse it would allow one candidate to have both the first word and the last word, which means we'll start with Mr. Nickel with your closing remarks.
Well, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, and I want to thank Mr. Reynoso. I think the voters certainly have a lot to consider this year, and it has been a very challenging election season. As Mr. Reynoso said, typically he and I would probably be out knocking on doors. Unfortunately, this year we haven't been able to do that as much as we'd like to. But I certainly encourage you to reach out to both of us. You can go to my website, henrynickel.com. You can also contact me by phone at 704-4653. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have that weren't asked tonight or anything that may come to mind before now in the election. But we have a great community here, and it's been an honor to serve on the council, been an honor to serve alongside fellow council members. And this is a great city, and we have a very bright future ahead of us. We do need to focus over the next 4 years primarily on addressing the homeless crisis, as was mentioned this evening, addressing crime in our city, how we effectively reduce crime. And there's a number of ways we have to do that, not only investing in our police department, but also ensuring that we improve the quality of our community in a way that will bring down the criminal behavior that we've seen over the years develop in various areas of the city that have really detrimentally impacted our residents. And then also revitalizing our city and making sure that we are a safe, clean, and sustainable community, not only now, but perpetually far into the future. And I look forward to working with you as constituents. I ask for your vote, and I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum this evening.
Mr. Reynoso, your closing remarks.
I'll thank the League of Women Voters once again. Henry, also you. I want to emphasize that I'm not just talking about developers without solutions. The fight at the airport was about community benefits, guaranteeing that our locals get hired first, that development is responsible, that it includes you from the ground up, challenging the way that we think that things function. That's been my role as an organizer, and it's been my role as a human being on this earth. Being from San Bernardino, I'm extremely caring and passionate because I know what it's like to be from right here. You've heard me say this before. All of you know what it's like to be from here. I'm running a clean race. I have no intention of smearing anyone. My contact information is on the most recent Slam piece, so please come find me, I suppose. But that's nothing personal. I believe that we have been doing the work that has been needing to be done in this community for so long. There are youth out there who are inspired, extremely inspired, to be involved and civically engaged, to go vote for the first time. It's not about me. This race is about everyone. This race is about the future of San Bernardino. It's about the kids who were like me and my friends, who became organizers because we knew no one was going to look out for us and we had to take the power into our own hands. It's time that people start doing the same. If I can be the inspiration for that, great. If you seek to be that for your friends, great. But I have to be totally honest. I need your help. I need for you to visit my website, votereynoso.com. I need for you to tell all your friends about me. I need you to tell them that I'm just here to tell the truth, to include you from the jump. I'm an organizer and I'll continue to be an organizer wherever I am. And so my passion, my heart, everything that I have to give, I will give it to this race and I will give it to San Bernardino. This work doesn't end here, and it never will. We have to continue to push and inspire one another to be more involved in our communities, to not rely on leadership solely to do the things that we know need to be changed, to bring about that change. We are the future of San Bernardino. And so I thank you for your time once again.
Thank you very much. This concludes the Fifth Ward Candidate Forum. We want to thank the candidates for your participation and the attendees for your participation and your questions. I also want to thank the league members who provided technical support this evening, including Scott Starbuck, Jorge Heredia, and Stephanie McLean. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. However, election season begins next week when the Registrar of Voters mails ballots to all registered voters. There are many options for voting that ballot. You can discover your options by accessing the County Registrar of Voters website at www.sbcountyelections.com. There's no reason not to vote. If you want to check your status as a registered voter, you can go to www.voterstatus.sos.ca.gov. And if you need to register or re-register, you can do so online at www.covr.sos.ca.gov. Many times it's difficult for voters to find information about candidates that may be lower on the ballot. The League offers a free service where all candidates can post information about themselves and their positions. It is called Voter's Edge, and if you are uncertain about a candidate, want to find out a bit more or see who's supporting them, check out votersedge.org. And again, thank you for your active interest and good evening.